Welcome to WCAT. I'm Kiki Latimer, and I'm your host for the Catholic Bookworm, where we read to learn, but we share with love in order to understand. And I'm very happy to have with me today John Ossi. Welcome, John.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
John's written a very important book that I've read over the last couple of days called Can We Care for Aging Parents at Home? And subtitle, Over 100 Questions to Ask Yourself, Parents, Siblings, In-Home Nurses, and Doctors when Considering Caring for Parents at Home. Just hold that up here. Certainly with our demographics changing, a lot of people are looking at caring for people at home and trying to avoid the nursing home scene. Good book, good questions, and we're going to be discussing it. You want to start us off with a prayer?
Sure. Lord Jesus, we ask that any listener who has to in the future deal or answer questions regarding care for their parents or other loved ones, that you would bless them with the knowledge and the grace to go forward and to be that caring person, to be able to love them during their latter years in life. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you. So you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, how you wound up writing this book?
Sure. I mean, I worked in the technical scientific field, being a trainer and installer of scientific equipment in different laboratories. And that ended up being sort of one of the chapters is what medical equipment is available to the regular home user that might help in this situation. But in my sort of retirement time, I began to take care of my parents on a part-time basis with another sibling doing the majority of the work. And then after they passed, I worked for 3 years in my local parish as the business manager. So that's what really prompted me to write this, is that I wish I knew a lot of the things that I put in this book much earlier than I knew them, because it would have made things a lot easier to go forward in caring for my parents.
Hindsight is 20/20, huh?
Yes. So one example of that is when my mother in particular announced, out of the blue that, hey, I just want you guys to know, the family to know, I'm not going to be staying in any nursing home. And that was sort of a out of the blue surprise, and it really caused a lot of discussion. And the mistake that we made was not so much a discussion with her, but a discussion amongst the siblings of how are we going to make that happen. We really should have included her with that. How Mom, would you like that to? What would that look like? It was good because it forced the question. It forced us to begin thinking about if we were going to make that happen, what kind of changes were going to be needed.
I think in general, families just don't have that discussion.
They do. That's correct. And sort of fortunate for us that she just dropped it as a bomb. And it was good in the end, because it forced the beginning of the discussion, even though it was amongst the siblings. And it became it wasn't self-evident, even though there were some funds available to help that occur. They lived in a home that was built in the 1950s that had no ground floor, shower or bedroom, and you had to climb the stairs to get to the bed. And so how the heck were we going to care for her, because it was already beginning to become difficult for her to go up and down the stairs. So she didn't want to go into a new house that was a rambler that would enable her to navigate all on the same floor. So all of these questions became really important to examine. And fortunately, um, the family was largely in agreement about how to go forward. I mean, we made the living room into a bedroom, had to put up new kinds of blinds. Um, uh, Only rarely did we have her go upstairs. And eventually she couldn't go upstairs at all anymore. So that means we had to find ways of maintaining hygiene in that makeshift bedroom. And there were several pieces of equipment and several nurses that we hired that were very instrumental in facilitating that from happening. But the conversation has got to start. And it's a scary conversation to have. And that's really where we should begin. Um, because
Yeah, I think it is a scary conversation. It was funny, just in this, well, first of all, 10 years ago, so my husband and I were in our 50s, and we made the decision to build a new home, to move and build a new home. And we built it with the idea of hopefully, aging in place. So there's a bathroom, bedrooms on the ground floor. We also put in a ramp instead of stairs on the front of the house, and made sure that you could get a wheelchair in at least one of the doors. In fact, just now we're putting in a basement bedroom, and for a young man who's going to be staying with us. And the carpenter said, what size door do you want? A 32-inch size door is fine for that bedroom downstairs, where there's also a bathroom. And I immediately said, no, it's got to be wheelchair accessible. 36 inches. I said, I might wind up being down there someday and my kids living upstairs. So you have to think those things out. But like you mentioned, I think one of the biggest issues of aging in place is the hygiene in the bathroom. You can easily turn a living room into a bedroom, but you can't easily turn a living room into a bathroom. And again, as you get older, you might not be able to step into a bathtub. So we made sure that our shower is a step-in shower. So looking ahead to hygiene, I find, is one of the biggest issues as people get older.
It's enormous. You hit it exactly right. You have the experience to know, and that's one of the things. If you have neighbors and friends who've been through this before, well, of course you could read the book. But if you could have neighbors or friends that have been through this before, is talk to them about those issues, because that's actually one of the things we thought would save us. Is okay, let's just get a wheelchair. We have as you mentioned, you could transform a living room into a bedroom, and then the wheelchair will help us deliver her to the downstairs bathroom, even though that bathroom doesn't have a shower or a bath. It'll facilitate what's needed in the hygiene department. But we found that wasn't the case at all because of what you actually just said. You had that correct too. And that was that the 1950s house had very narrow doorways, and a wheelchair needs a lot of space, not just to run, but to turn. So
Right.
we couldn't actually get her out of the wheelchair we couldn't get the wheelchair into the bathroom.
The
And
bathroom.
so that means that the wheelchair was it could go back and forth 5 or 6 feet in the 20 by 12 living room, but it couldn't deliver her through the hallway into the bathroom. So that was a surprise of how useless the wheelchair was in a 1950s house. So that's
And then I think, the bathroom thing that a lot of families really don't want to talk about is who's going to bathe mom, who's going to bathe the dad. Are you comfortable bathing an opposite sex parent? And that can be extremely difficult for some people. For some people, it's just mom or dad's body and it's no big deal. But for some people, it's extremely uncomfortable for a son to think about bathing mom or for a daughter to think about bathing dad. And those are issues that have to be talked about. And is the parent comfortable? Is everybody, or is this going to become a nightmare for
Yeah,
everybody?
that's a very, very good point, because both sides are going to always have some level of discomfort. So, having, and this is one of those things where, um, yes, you can talk about it and you can plan, but if there's a fall and an injury, suddenly the threshold level of embarrassment gets changed quite rapidly, because the parent knows, if, you know, if my son Billy can't come and clean me, I'm going to just sit here in the way I am for
Right.
days or for hours. And
Right.
so,
And I think it's important for people to realize that we're not just talking hygiene here. We're talking about skin breakdown. If you're sitting in poop or urine for more than a couple of hours, as you age, your skin is getting thinner and thinner. So then you're not just talking about being stinky and dirty. You're talking about skin breakdown, which means open wounds and severe pain. And sometimes the inability to heal those open wounds. So the necessity of hygiene isn't just a matter of like, oh, I want to smell good or I don't want to sit and poop for an hour or two. It's skin breakdown. So I think it's important that people realize that the importance of hygiene is like massive once we're dealing with an elderly person, especially if someone's bedridden.
yes, yes, it is much easier to have someone come in once a day who's has the title of helper, or so there are some nurse assistants, as they're called, that can
Right.
come in, and that becomes a lot more reasonable for them to, more acceptable to the parent, to have them come and take care of those issues. There's another really advantage. We at times had to have them come in, and there were issues with that, and not just the expense, but there was a plus and a minus to that. One thing is that some of them who were experienced taught us things that we wouldn't have known about how to move a disabled person, how to get them to cooperate, to expose the part of the body that needed to be in order to get cleaned, and so on.
Yep.
And some of them were just masterful and had these techniques that we really benefited from. And
It's
then
incredible. Yeah, they really know how to turn and move and yeah, and they make it look easy and they teach you, which is wonderful. Yeah.
and the parent is much more compliant when it comes to a stranger telling them, please, I want you to do this, rotate that way, rather than having a son or a daughter do it. But there's also a downside, not just the expense. I mean, back then, well over about a decade ago now, it was $25 an hour to have some of these come. And there were times in which we had three different ones come, so that they were there 24 hours a day, three 8-hour shifts. It was just necessary at some point to do that. And of course, no no insurance pays for that, if I remember correctly. Um, but the other downside, and they varied greatly in their abilities, and how they interacted with our parents. In some cases, it was just tremendous. Sometimes they became best friends, and they would actually
Right.
talk about their whole lives, and it was worth gold. I mean, absolute gold, because that interaction was more important than any medical treatment that could be purchased. But at other times, I'll think of one in particular would always come late. Another one would actually come and check on my mom and then go to sleep. Actually, would pull out a blanket and go to sleep. And when I called the company and said, "This is what's happening," they go, "No, that can't be right." I go, "I'm here and I saw it." I go, "Well, do you have the evidence of that?" I go, "My own." They go, "No, we don't believe you." And I had to actually get a camera to be able to record this, for them to believe me. And then changes happened. She no longer did that anymore. but there
Yeah.
are difficulties.
There can also be people who are, I hate to say it, downright nasty to the elderly, and why they have this job, I don't know. But I also want to mention, because I did see this happen at least once, there are people out there that are not in line with our Catholic beliefs for end of life. And they would gladly give your loved one a little too much morphine, not to end pain, but to end life. And I did see that happen once, and tried to intervene. It's another story. But, do not assume that hospice is Catholic. A lot of good people there, but definitely not all of them are following what, we believe of, the intrinsic value of human life from conception to natural death. And it's important to know that who's there with your loved one.
And that's, yeah, you're jumping ahead to I have a chapter called End of Life Planning. And I was at the doctor just recently and he handed me a stack of, for myself, not for any parent. And he handed me a stack of things wanting me to fill it out. And it was all about what I plan to, if I become unconscious, what should the doctor do or not do? And watch out for those documents. The
Right.
National Center of Catholic Bioethics has the proper documents that you should use, and it has the proper cautions. Even if you use them, you should be careful about how they become implemented.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
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 it's like a maze to navigate. I think the most important thing is, the people that are going to be caring for you, whether it's children or a good friend and also your spouse, that they have some idea what your wishes are to begin with. Also just end of life things like, simple things like, do you want to be cremated? Where do you want to be buried? Do you want a funeral mass? I know so many Catholic parents, in the last 10 years who have died and have not had a funeral mass said for them because their children just say, no, no, no funeral mass for you. We're just going to cremate you and throw you in the river kind of thing. And we know full well that those people would want we're daily communicants, God help us, but they're not going to have a funeral mass. And so we've
yeah.
often had funeral masses said for people, because their children are not following what they know full well would be their parents' wishes. So get that stuff in writing, folks.
Yes, this is a very good point. I have a chapter called Operational Faith where, and it's very easy to think that as parents decline, cognitively, things become more difficult. Physically, their joints don't operate and so on. So you think that all their religious upbringing and all of their interaction with God, it also declines. But no, the exact opposite happens.
Like
It seems,
not.
they become closer. They realize that as the end becomes nearer, that they want, their desire for God becomes greater. And so if they have a good relationship with their parish, make sure that their pastor's visiting, make sure he's aware of their condition, of how far along he is. Um, Make sure that they've had, the sacrament of the sick used to be called last rites, but
Right.
and in this instance, it is more along the lines of the last rites. And if things are very serious, you can ask for the apostolic blessing. I asked for that, and the deacon was stunned that I even knew what the apostolic blessing was. And I said, no, they're getting close. I'd like to do that, and they did. You can look that up, what apostolic blessing is. Uh,
So
but
bringing the Eucharist to your parents, I have friends that I bring the Eucharist to them as often as I can because they're pretty much homebound. They can't get to Mass. They're not comfortable for various reasons reaching out to their parish. So I bring them the Eucharist, and it's so important. Um,
that is wonderful. That is true too. There's God, if they're not comfortable, sometimes they can think, oh, the priest is just too busy to come and see me. The exact opposite is really true. When you talk to most pastors, most priests, they are like, no, I want to be there. I want to come and visit. And he can appropriately ask for if they'd like to do confession. You'd think, well, what could they possibly want to confess? You'd be surprised. I think, not that I'm aware, but I'm just thinking of myself. Is I would want to, I would want to know. I would want to know that I had a few last times to be able to make sure that I didn't miss anything. Not because that it's a checkbox, but because of the love of Christ. Is I want to be able to have whatever graces are available, and sin can be a block to that, and that's true for the elderly as well. So
And people should also be aware that, back in the day, your parish priest knew when you got sick, the parishioners knew when you got sick because of the HIPAA Act, and you cannot waive HIPAA. Believe me, I have tried to waive HIPAA. It's very difficult. You can sign forms saying I waive HIPAA for these particular people, and make sure you do that for your spouse and maybe for your children and your closest friends. You can sign a form to waive HIPAA, but your parish priest is not going to find out that you are sick unless you tell him, or your sibling, your children tell him. Your parishioners, the people you go to, your church family will not know that you are dying unless you've made a point of making sure they're informed because of
yes,
HIPAA. Used to be the
yes,
doctor would call your parish priest, the hospital would call your parish priest and say, Susie's dying, get over to her house. That's not the case. They legally can't do it because of HIPAA.
mm,
So it's important to be aware of that, and to call the people that need. I've even made a list, if I'm dying or I'm very, very sick, inform these people. you know, um,
very good. So if we could backpedal, we talked a little bit about wheelchairs and things that might be helpful. There are some things surprisingly helpful that are not big, expensive things. Wheelchairs can be incredibly expensive, but in normal size houses, wheelchairs just haven't been very useful, other than delivering you in and out of the home. But things like a shower bench, where if you can get your parent into the shower, you don't want them standing. If they have any instability at all in their frame, a shower bench is tremendous. It basically, think of basically just a plastic chair that you can sit on, that'll hold you up nicely, and that can take the water spray. And they even have them such that you can sit on the chair on the outside of if you have a tub with a tall wall, you can sit on the part that's outside of the tub, and then you can just scoot yourself inside because it's half in and half out. And the safety factor that you get from that is just tremendous. I mean, I bought one for ourselves that occasionally I use when I'm having trouble, and it is really quite helpful. So a shower bench, and they probably are not covered by insurance, but they cost under a couple $100, and so they are well.
Here in Rhode Island, we have an organization, and I'm trying to think if it's from the Masonic Temple, but they supply for free hospital beds, shower things, walkers, anything, pads, diapers, everything, and they supply it all for free. You have to go and pick it up, and then after your loved one passes, they come and pick up all the equipment. My guess is it's probably in other states as well. So again, that's something you can Google nowadays. I think there's a lot of organizations, as the demographic ages the way it is, that are providing these things for free.
Yeah, I would be a little bit careful about anything that would come from a Masonic source,
I know, but they are
but
providing it.
so all of the ones that I've obtained are, including wheelchairs, were from Goodwill or from other secondhand places, and you can get them at about a quarter of the cost of what they cost new. So the shower chair that was normally $200, for instance, I got I got it 25 or $30. So
Well,
you
this
can check.
place was no weird strings attached or anything. You just went to this warehouse, picked it up and left. So
Oh,
you didn't have
cool.
to
Okay.
join or anything, you know.
That's good. So you can also check secondhand places. Of course,
Secondhand place.
if it is a chair, you're going to want to test it yourself. Especially if you weigh more than your parent does, or have two of you sit on it once. Make sure it's in good condition.
Other
Um,
thing is Marketplace, Facebook Marketplace is loaded with medical equipment that people are getting rid of.
and Craigslist is very good as
Craigslist.
well.
Yeah.
Craigslist is very nice. Is that it sort of keeps your anonymity. You can get stuff and sell stuff and give away stuff without having to indicate who you are, which is very nice. So wheelchairs, the shower bench. One other thing that can be really important is bathroom handholds. Nowadays, when they're building bathrooms, they're installing them, even though the bathroom's not intended for the elderly, because it's becoming sort of a natural thing that everyone likes to use. I just installed one in my bathroom here, and my wife said instantly, as soon as she saw it was there, she uses it all the time now. You just naturally, if there's a handhold in the shower, you naturally your hand, and it's at the right level, your hand naturally goes right to it and gives you stability and all the time. Now the scary thing about these is that there's a whole bunch of suction cup type available ones, which, as I wrote in the book, hold amazingly well until they don't, and they don't let you know when they're going to fail. They just all of a sudden lose their suction and go. So
I
that's the
tell
most.
people if they go with the suction ones, get the expensive ones. Don't go with cheapy suction ones.
Yeah, and you have to make sure that those suction cups don't go over. The surface has to be totally flat and totally
Right,
clean.
not over a tile line. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and there's a lot more on that in the book. And I plan actually on expanding the book into more equipment, because equipment is something I was trained in, and so it's not necessarily this kind of equipment, but other types of equipment. And knowing some of the details can make all the difference. But one other little piece of thing that you didn't think you would need, and running to the drugstore for it wasn't a good idea, is a pill cutter. And if your parents are on medication, not just a pill cutter, but a pill caddy, as it's called, so that you can put in the days. You can put in Monday's pills, Tuesday's pills, Wednesday's pills, so that all you need to do is open that door up and the pills are ready for that day. But a cutter, in case you need to reduce the medication by a certain amount. If you try and do it with a chef's knife, you're risking cutting yourself, and you usually shoot pills all over the kitchen, as I've done many times. So getting a little pill cutter, and some of them are terrible, and some of them are just excellent to be able to, because you may find, as we did, that the physician will say, well, maybe you need to reduce that medication. Instead of getting a whole new prescription with lower dosages, you can simply cut the pill. Uh, you have to be careful. You don't want to go into production mode and cut a whole bunch of pills, because it causes them to age more rapidly. But you only want to cut them, a day or so, or maybe a week in. But getting a pill cutter is very, very helpful. Let's see, what else? Um, I think also it might, if this doesn't seem overwhelming, then you're not really thinking, thinking of the level of how difficult this is. It really is quite difficult, and you will be overwhelmed, but you can make a difference. And I think, I think that the outcome is always going to be not the best, right? Not ideal. Is the outcome is going to be that usually the death of your parents. That is unavoidable. So how much love can you provide? How much care is is I think the key of how to measure this, rather than whether you can really affect the outcome. Can you push out their death by a decade or several years? Perhaps, I have no idea, but I do know that any Christian with a caring heart will be able to make a huge difference in the life of their parents during their latter years. I mean, Mother Teresa is, apparently everybody misquotes Mother Teresa all the time, but one of her quotes that is true is that do small things with great love. So you might not be able to have them move in with you, or you might not be able to move in and completely take over their care, but you can begin to do things that can make a difference, and find out what that is, and try and make a difference. One of the really surprising things that made a huge difference was when we started accompanying our parents to doctor's appointments. That's one of my longest chapters, is what to do and how to try and get yourself into attending those doctor's appointments, because they're not cognitively on the level that they used to be. And so hearing what the doctor says is very, very, very helpful. If you just ask them, if they went to the doctor themselves and then you come home, what did the doctor say? Well, he didn't say anything. But if you go, you'll find he says quite a bit. Uh, and you'll be able to affect their care greatly by attending those appointments, if you're allowed to. Get permission. Get permission from the doctor, get permission from your parent. And if you're a son or a daughter, usually they don't require any signed documentation. They know that they wouldn't be able to make it easily unless you were there.
I think one of the things that happens as we age is, with the doctor, we don't know what questions to ask after a while. We just don't ask the right questions, or we're unaware of things as we age. And so it's so important to have somebody, especially like a son or a daughter, there with you at some point, because they can help ask the right questions, and then they can help you remember the answers. I took care of an elderly friend 2-3 years ago now, and she would ask the right questions, but by the time we got home, she didn't know what the answers were. And so she'd say, well, what did they say? And I'd say, well, he said this, or she said that. And that was important.
That you just hit another really important thing. Yes. They forget, they can't remember what was said, and they're not asking the right questions. There's also, my parents had a particularly view of physicians, like almost a godlike view of physicians, and you couldn't question them. You could receive information, but you could never go, I don't think that's right, doc. I think we should do this. They would never do that. We had to do that. My sister and I noticed that a particular medication was not helping the way it should have helped, and yet we got all the side effects that we knew was the result of this medication. We went to the doctor and said, this is what we observed. And he said, okay, well, let's titrate that down and then turn that off. And that, our parent would have never done that. Never. That would have been an insult. As a matter of fact, they complained that we were occasionally, that there were, if we wanted to do what we wanted, ask the doctor, they said, no, that's not right. He's a doctor after all. And you can't question him. But that's, fortunately, that notion has gone by the wayside, I think, today.
I think it's important to really emphasize it has gone by the wayside. And also, if you're not proactive with your health care or unable to, it's not going to happen anymore. The demographic is now that we have so many elderly people and so few doctors, that each doctor is dealing with hundreds of patients at this point in time. It's not the family doctor idea that you grew up with. You've got huge corporations owning these medical practices, and they have hundreds of patients, and they're all elderly and very, very needy. And the 15, I've worked in the doctor's office, that what used to be, the 15, they schedule a 15-minute appointment, but an elderly person's going to be in there for at least a half an hour. And there's lots of elderly patients now, and they're just not able to give you that personalized health care. So you have to be proactive for your parent or for yourself nowadays.
And that's a very good point. I have a list of all the things that you should bring when you go, not just and some of these are going to require a little bit of research. Like if you go to a new doctor, he's going to ask you for the history of of your parent. What is the medical history? When did they have any operations? But I didn't have that in my head. We had to dig that up. Also, what all the prescriptions are that they are currently on, and what ones they're allergic to. I have a list of about 20 things that you should have available to you. You should have a paper and pencil because you sound like you'd remember everything the doctor said, but even me as attending, it wouldn't. I couldn't remember everything that he said, so I would write it down because we would go home and she could remember some, but not everything, and we would disagree about what was said. And if I had it written, it was very, very helpful.
The other thing I've thought of recently, so I have elderly friends, but the wife is quite a bit younger than the husband. So she at this point is taking care of him. So, caring for him at home. And one day, this is the couple I bring the Eucharist to, but one day recently I said to her, well, what if something happens to you? Like, does anybody know where his meds are and what his meds are? Do the children know? Because they're like, it became clear nobody would have known what to give him or even where his medicines were in the house if something happened to her. And so I had everything written down. So we sat down on my next visit and we wrote down where his pills are in the house, and they weren't like in normal places, and what he takes. So that should something happen to her, even though she's younger, his care wouldn't get too interrupted.
So there's an ancillary notion to that, and that the fire department has a little packet, a magnetic packet that you can put on the fridge, and it has a list. It enables you to list all the medications that each member of the household is on, so that if they need to come in an emergency, for instance, if she were to pass out and he calls 911, they're going to want to know what medications she's on in order to help revive her, in order to take care of her on the way to the hospital. And so he's not going to be cognizant necessarily of what those lists are. So you can get those lists from the fire department, and they're on a little magnetic packet, and you put it on the fridge, and the emergency guys know to look for that packet on the fridge when they come and they are taking care of an unconscious person or any kind of injured person. And that is critical information. That's one of the recommendations I put in there as well.
Of course, we all recently know, I'm trying to think, who was it, this movie star gentleman who died, his wife died, she was caring for him, and then no one knew that she had died, and so he was left alone for 2 weeks until he and the dog died. Who was that?
Yeah, he was a famous actor.
Yeah.
I'll think of it when we sign off, I'm sure.
So, yeah, so, I said to, I started to talk to the children, the family, saying, check in on mom. Like, somebody needs to be daily touching base with your parents, because, like, if the elderly man, if he died, she would know what to do. If she were to die or fall, let's say, doing the laundry in the basement, I don't think would know. He might just think she's out going grocery shopping, or he may just continue sleeping and not. He wouldn't think to call 911, I don't think. And so you'd have a situation. So I've started saying, okay, somebody's got to be checking in daily just to make sure somebody's answering the phone, and, so that no more than 24 hours would go by. And it sounds terrible again, you've got to have these conversations because stuff happens, life happens, and death happens, and accidents happen. And if the competent person in the household gets hurt and the incompetent person doesn't know to call somebody, you got to be checking in on people, neighbors. Not everyone has children. Check in on your neighbors. Check in on people in your parish family.
Yes.
We
had several experiences of that where people went actually several days without anybody realizing that they had passed away. Even a young man was younger than me. It happened to us in the family. So I understand what you're exactly right about that. One of the things that can help, you have to be careful about misusing this, but because we had difficulties with various nursing assistants that were there when we were not, um, I put in cameras at various key locations so I could mostly see how my mom was being cared for, and I could look in on those cameras and see what was up. Uh, the one interesting instance, was when we got a new one. A new, I called the nursing company, and they said, no, it's no problem that you have those. You just have to let us know, because we're going to let the the nurses know that they are being watched. And one day, one walked in and took the camera and actually turned it so it faced the wall, so it couldn't see anything anymore. Anymore. I saw her actually do that because I was on the camera at the time. But happily, that camera had a rotating ability, so all I could do was I could swing it back around again, so she could never, unless she were to unplug it, which she didn't do, I could always view what was going on. So those can be very helpful, and they can be pretty inexpensive, and you don't need to necessarily buy a subscription to having those. A lot of them are that all the companies are pushing towards subscriptions, but many companies like Blink, you can forego the subscription and just simply use the standalone. It has fewer features, but it has sufficient features to be able to check in and see how things are going. Um,
I mean, many people are awesome with elderly people, but some simply aren't. And,
yeah.
it's
Yes.
kind of scary.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Mm.
One, I mean, the best nurse that we ever had was from Cameroon, and she was a fallen away Catholic. And she and my mom became very best friends, and they would talk up a storm. And by the end of, she was there many months, she returned to the church as a result of caring for my mother. So that was a cool story.
Beautiful.
Um, yeah, one of the going back to doctor's appointments. I'm jumping around a little bit here, but uh, when the doctor says to the your elderly patient, your parent, so how's your pain level? That was an hilarious thing where my mom would never answer that question of how is your pain. She was on a pain medication, and he obviously appropriately was asking. The doctor was asking, so how is your pain level? And she would not. He tried every which way to ask that question, and she would not answer. So you need to be able to answer those questions that they either refuse to answer or cannot answer. I said it's one of the mysteries of. I still am unsure. I only have guesses as to why she wouldn't answer that question.
Well, I
Uh,
thought about it when I read that, I'm thinking she's there with her, and we're talking about another different generation here. She's there with her son. The doctor's a man, like, and sometimes an older woman is not going to say, like, I have vaginal pain, I've got a UTI, like your son's there, this guy's a doctor, like send in a woman, folks, and the same for the guys, if you're there with your daughter and you've got a female doctor and you're not getting answers, send in your son, please, send in a guy to ask the questions, because it just gets, those questions get sticky. And if it's down there, like, you're just not going to want to talk about it, especially an older person who's been brought up in a different generation. Our generation talks about everything, but my mother's generation didn't, and my grandmother's generation certainly didn't. And I know a lot of people, they would just rather die than, discuss the fact that they have a UTI with somebody.
well,
Of
the
the
urinary tract infection, actually, that's super common amongst the
common.
elderly. Very, very common. And there's a strange, and I didn't put this in the book, I probably should have, but there's a strange thing that occurs that patients go a little bit loopy when
Right.
they have a UTI, when you don't think, what the heck is the connection? I don't even know if medical science knows what the connection
Well, it's
is.
often connected to dehydration. So you get dehydrated, which affects your blood system in your brain. I mean, just even if you don't get a UTI, if you get dehydrated, you get cranky, you get miserable, you get weird. And so you get those, and then that goes into a UTI. But yeah, you're right. You'll often get like belligerent behavior or loopy, weird stuff, and it's all connected. They actually have a UTI. And you can die from a UTI, folks, so,
It's an
hydro,
infection. Infections can grow. Yeah. So that's so.
and hydration, getting elderly people to drink is very difficult, you know.
Especially if they've ever choked on some water before, which I mean, I'm surprised when I go to the dentist. How is your swallowing? What do you mean? How is my swallowing? You're a dentist. You're a tooth person. They know that as you get older, it becomes a factor. And if you inhale water rather than drink it causes a problem. But one of the when we experienced that UTI and she got a little bit loopy, thought, oh, I mean, I thought it was the normal decline. But interestingly, after the antibiotic and the UTI cleared up, the loopiness went away. Yeah,
Yes.
we never expected that. That was one of those very few wonderful things that you don't expect. Most unexpected things are negative when you're caring for the elderly, but that one was wonderful.
Yes,
She came back and couldn't remember that she never knew that she was loopy, which is part of
right.
being loopy. Yeah. What?
Memory loss and delusions and things like that you talk about in one of your chapters, and the real importance of not like correcting the person. You just make them miserable if you try to correct somebody and to get them back to, reality that they're not in at that point in time.
Yes, if you have a person who's in the midst of a delusion or a hallucination, trying to convince them otherwise can make them very, very unhappy and very angry at you. And they will. The other really interesting thing is that they think that you are the one who's deluded. So you have two people who feel each other as being, being deluded, and what what more would you want for a disastrous situation than that? So how you go forward is very, very touchy. And a friend of mine who I heard about, his brother-in-law used the technique of saying, "Dad, I want you to trust me on this. Just can you trust me? Have I ever steered you wrong?" And he said, "Yeah, okay, I'll trust you. I still feel like I see this person in the room, but I trust that it's the medication that's doing that and not what the reality is." And he was able to have some success. With me, my dad had a delusion that some bad thing was happening to the family, and I spent all night trying to convince him otherwise. And the only plus was that he became so tired that he eventually went to sleep. And instead of trying to leave and put on his pants and get the car keys and try and drive off, which I was never going to let happen. But
But sometimes if you can just say like, okay, we've called the police are on their way, like everything's been taken care of. Just I've seen
yes,
people in those situations just go, oh, thank God. Oh, thank you so much. Like, and then
I
it's over.
I think
Yeah.
though, if you fib, you can get into you can get into trouble because you'll be asked about exactly how did that, what police did you call, and when are they gonna come and report back to us? And so try you can try and be as generic as possible. It's all taken care
Yeah,
of.
right.
I think is good. I made a call, and everything will be okay, I think. But try not to be specific about the
Right.
lies, because
Right.
it's amazing how a deluded person, how sharp they are, and how they can use logic to debunk your lie. And I found that was operating on that
Yeah.
night when I tried to take care of my
Pray,
father.
pray a lot.
Yes, yes, yes. Um, there are things that you can do to begin to prepare. One is, I think, have your parents join AARP, uh, the American Association of Retired Persons. There are some things that they propose that uh, are a little weird, I think, but mostly they have a lot of good information in their publications. For instance, if there's a new test out that is helping the elderly, they'll talk about it and how effective it might be. Various food groups that might be help enhance um, cognitive ability and things like that. Um, there can be great encouragement from reading about other people who have had similar situations and struggles, and so a lot of the publications are helpful along for that.
Mm. And it's
Um,
also, I think, important since we're mentioning food and water by the church are not considered extraordinary means by any measure.
Never, yeah,
Get
never.
food and water as long, and I just want to put in here, you get food and water as long as the body is assimilating the food and the water. So if somebody's kidneys have shut down, you do not need to keep pumping water into them with an IV until they blow up like a tick. There are times when the church, okay, the body is no longer functioning, but you would still continue to give water in their mouth area and hydrate their lips so that they're not like uncomfortable and miserable. You'd still continue to clean their mouth out with water. A lot of times people don't realize how important it is to continue to clean somebody's mouth out once they've stopped eating and drinking. But your mouth is still shedding cells, and so it's getting disgusting and slimy. So get those little sponge things and dig it out. And it's not pretty to do, but do it because that's what you would want done to you. Those kinds of things that you learn that you don't think about, but they're important, especially towards very end of life, active dying. There's a lot of mouth breathing going on as opposed to nasal breathing. And so keeping somebody's mouth clean and fresh is important, And also, a lot of times the mouth smell gets really bad. And so keeping the person's mouth clean so that, family can come and, give you a kiss and hug you, and not be horrified by how you smell. So those kind of hygiene things that we don't even consider if you haven't been caring for someone at home. And I will also mention if your parent is in a nursing home, they're not doing that in the nursing home. They don't have time to do those kind of things for your parent in a nursing home. They go in, they diaper you, and they're out of there. So those little things, if you have a parent that you can't care for at home, but you're going in maybe once every day or every other day, those kind of things like mouth cleaning you need to do. You might not like it at first too much.
I didn't know about that one.
Yeah, yeah.
That's good. That's good. So you mentioned nursing homes. I list in the first chapter the different type of care facilities that are available. Just a sentence for each, and they're quite varied, and they have their borders sort of blur. The differences between them are blurred quite a bit. And so one of the tests when you walk through one of these facilities is to see how many people are off of their computers and actually caring for people in their individual rooms. We've been in facilities and heard about facilities where there are 30, 40 patients and there's a single person going room to room. And in other places where there are multiple people available, where the ratio is much higher. And it tells you a little bit about the level of care that they will be getting. And when you are evaluating those places, make sure that you go when it's not visiting hours. And if you're a direct, sibling of, if you're a child of your parents, I think they can't really say that you have visiting hours. I think most places allow you to go in at any time. They ask that you don't, but it's really helpful to go in when when it's not visiting hours, and especially when it's time for eating, and you can see what the food quality is that is being delivered and how it's being delivered. Um, that's really
You
important.
also have the right to put cameras in those rooms as well, and I highly recommend it. I had my elderly friend that I finally wound up bringing home. I had to start marking her sheets. She was blind, first of all, which was like made matters even worse during COVID. And I had to set up cameras. But one of the things I also had to do was mark her sheets with a pencil to see if they were changing her sheets, and they weren't. I'd get there a week later and I'd see the same mark, and it's like, you haven't changed her sheets. So keeping track of things like that, you'd be surprised. And again, many, many nursing homes and assisted living places are just so short-staffed right now. At one point, we had one person doing the meds for 200 patients. And this place just couldn't keep help. And, I finally, like I said, pulled my friend out of there and brought her actually to my daughter's home. And the last 8 months, we took care of her at home, because it was just a difficult situation, and she was blind and mentally challenged, and it was just a nightmare, but we did it.
And how long was she there for?
She was in the assisted living for a year, I believe, just about a year. And then she was with us for, I think it was maybe close to 10 months before she passed.
Okay.
And it was a very challenging situation. She'd had mental illness her whole life. And then in her last couple of years, she had gone blind. And so it was very difficult, extremely difficult. And then she lost her ability to walk. And, we were doing the walker and then the wheelchair. And yeah, so I learned a lot with that one. And, and one of the things a lot of elderly people and people don't realize it, is your whole body is breaking down. I mean, if things aren't going well, nothing's going well, and your whole body's breaking down. And like you're saying, the hygiene issues become the biggest ones, and incontinence. And what we found, and you're trying to figure it out with meds, is the person's either got diarrhea or they've got constipation. And you're trying to find a balance between those two, and it's not an easy task if all of that's breaking down. And neither is a pretty situation, because, like you're saying, if you have people coming in, but if somebody's got diarrhea, chances are they've got it 24/7. So you're trying to keep them clean. You're constantly changing, trying to keep the skin from breaking down. And then you think, well, constipation sounds better, but constipation isn't a pretty picture either, because then they're in pain and they're uncomfortable, and you wind up having to do some digging to get somebody who's unimpacted, and that's not a pretty picture either. So you kind of really, one of the things that amazed me about caregiving is, I don't even know how to put it. You learn the preciousness and the intimacy of the human body. And you learn to view it in a different way. And as a caregiver, you get over being prissy about things. And at the same time, you do it in a way to preserve the person's dignity. And it's a fine line between getting what needs to get done and preserving dignity for the person, for yourself as well, but also for the person. And when it's a parent, I think it's even more difficult to find that balance. But you're kind of all in the same boat. So.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, what psalm we are fearfully and wonderfully made, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And sometimes it's more fearfully.
Yes, yes.
I want to go back to the very first chapter, or the very first introduction, and that's to the question of, are we a burden? And I think as some of our previous generation, we really heard our parents say, I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to be a burden. And quite a number of years back, I really started to think about that whole concept of we shouldn't be a burden to one another. And I've told my children, let me just say it right out to you kids, I'm probably going to eventually be a burden, and I'd gladly be a burden because my being a burden will eventually make you a better human being. And I think that needs to be said.
I think that the key thing is what's the definition of a burden? I mean, if a parent is one who wants to be, waited on hand and foot and brought gourmet meals and bring me my pipe and my slippers kind of attitude, then that's a problem. If it's like, I don't want you to have to deal at all with my care, that's the opposite. That's the opposite problem. You've used the word balance several times, and you're right. Is where is it where should children be assisting in their parents' elderly years? Yes, but how much and to what extent, and in what areas? That has to be determined by each family.
I mean, I've watched this elderly woman, 70, I think she's got to be in her late 70s. And for the last 5 years until her parents passed, she took care of her parents, two of them in their 90s, medical appointments. And she had them with her for at least a year and then eventually a nursing home. But she did medical appointments and everything. And it was a burden. I mean, it was hard. She was 10 years older than I am, and she was doing this with elderly, 90. But there was love there, and there was frustration. But she did it, and I think she'd be the first one to tell you it made her a better person. It wasn't easy. I think we're a society that we just don't like any kind of burdens, right? I mean, we don't. We just want convenience and
everything
fun.
easy.
Everything easy. And I think, virtue comes sometimes from burden and from taking the not so easy road. And so I've said to my kids, I don't want to go to nursing home and I'm probably going to be a burden, suck it up and deal with it because, you'll be a better person for it. And my sister took care of my mother, and her mother-in-law did almost all of the caregiving, and it made her a better person. I know taking care of my friend Carolyn made me a better person. I don't know how I got through the 3 years of it, but God help me, I know it was not easy. She was extremely difficult to deal with. Mental illness, blindness,
Was she combative?
incontinence.
Did she fight you? Was she combative, verbally
At the
combative?
verbally, she was extremely abusive, but she'd always been. But yeah, towards the end, it got really bad, abusive, screaming, yelling. And I would just say, "Oh, Carolyn, I love you." She'd be like, "I don't know why," but it did. It made me a better person. Was it easy? No. Was she a burden? Yeah, she was. In the best sense of the word, yeah.
What would you do differently if you had to do it again?
Nothing, except in the very last moments, a nurse. There was one moment where I felt like a nurse tried to just sort of put her out of her misery. I would have stepped in with people a little bit more towards the end, and I would have leaned more in the direction of comfort than hygiene once somebody is in the dying process. I don't know if that makes sense.
Sure.
I think once someone's in the dying process, it's more important that they be comfortable and peaceful than clean. Because if they get a bed sore, 2 hours before they die, it doesn't matter. Um, so I think that's the only thing that I would say I would do differently, is I would have fought a little more towards the end for comfort. Um,
I want
and
to
the
end
other
on,
thing I learned a long time ago, I got to a friend who was in the dying process, and they had given my friend Sandy a lot of morphine. And I said to them, back off on the morphine. And they said, well, she gets very agitated. And I said, she's dying, and I want her to be able to say goodbye to her husband, back off on the morphine. And I kind of like took over. And so they said, well, all right, we'll try to, we won't give her that next dose and see what happens. They weren't happy with me. And, but they did back off on the morphine, and she did come around, and she was able to say goodbye to her husband. She was able to say goodbye to me and tell us that, we were able to say, I love you. And she was able to say, I love you. And then she passed with consciousness, she passed beautifully. My experience with hospice is that they're more interested in keeping somebody completely sedated and peaceful rather than having the opportunity to say goodbye to people. And that's been my experience a number of times, that you have to fight for consciousness for the person. Obviously not to the point if they're in extreme pain or something like that. But my experience with hospice is, that you do need to fight. You do need it clear that you want to be conscious. And again, that's a conversation you have to have. I've had that conversation with my kids. Unless I'm in extreme pain, I want to be conscious. I want to be able to pray. I want to be able to talk to you guys. I want to be able to say my goodbyes. I want to be able to say I love you. Do not have me doped up on morphine unless I'm in extreme pain. That's a conversation that you need to have. Because if you don't have it, and everybody's emotions and are running high and everybody doesn't know what's going on at the end, you're just going to be given morphine and die unconscious.
I think that's you make another really good point. I mentioned in the end of life chapter that when my father was in his last season, I got a medical journal document that basically, it was a publication that said when at end of life issues, the big problem, watch out for Christians who will want to extend the life of the person under all and any conditions, and no matter what. And I was sort of shocked by this document. It was done, actually, it came from a Catholic medical university. And I investigated the documentation from the National Catholic Bioethics Center and other sources, and that is simply not the case. If there are any Catholics who believe that, that's a problem, because that's not what the church teaches. And what the church teaches is what you've elucidated and is very clear. I outline it in the book. And if you have an individual case of you're wondering what to do, you can call the National Bioethics Center, and they will put somebody on with you who will guide you through the proper pathway. But extending life under any and all conditions forever is not what the church teaches.
No, it is not.
Yeah, yeah.
And painful procedures that are questionable or not necessary. Yeah, there does come a time to say goodbye.
Yeah, yes. You don't have to agree to every single medical intervention that is available. Certainly, towards the end of life, you can refuse them more and more. Especially if recovery looks like it's going to be worse than trying to deal with the current situation. And go ahead. I was going to just say, I wanted to just end by saying that there was one sort of, everything that we talked about is just very difficult and very it can seem overwhelming, and that's because it is. But you can make a huge difference. But one thing to really keep in mind um, is if you are spending time with your parents, if there are times, down times, where you're not dealing with doctors, you're not dealing with medication and hygiene, where you can watch a show together, where you can um, maybe relive some of the shows that your parents used to watch when they were kids and share them together, or baseball games, or whatever they would enjoy. Those times can be just worth gold. And remember to, in the midst of all the difficulty and the pain and the suffering and the doctors, that there are times in which you can share things that can be fun and relieving of the burdens of end of life issues. So to continue continue to look for those as well.
Beautiful book. Can we care for aging parents at home? John Ossi. Is there anything, there's so much in your book. It's a wonderful book. Really, you've really touched on so many things in it that are very, very helpful. Is there anything that we missed that you'd like to mention?
Well, I just want to mention that I'm going to expand the section on medical equipment at home that can make a huge difference. I want to have the pictures and have greater explanation of how these items can help, because we were under the impression that the wheelchair would really solve everything, and it solved almost nothing. But it actually made things much more difficult. Um, and that's, I should be able to have that out probably in a month or so, and it'll be the same book under the same title, available on Amazon.
Great. So I was going to ask you, where can people get it? Amazon?
Amazon, yes.
Great. Great. Well, thank you so much. This has been amazing. I really learned a lot from the book, and also it just confirms stuff that I already knew from having dealt with these kind of situations. So very well done. Do you want to end us with a prayer?
Sure. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord, give us the grace to deal with those difficult situations that we have that are forthcoming in our lives, some of which we might be aware of, and others that we are not. And give us that grace and wisdom to be able to be obedient to you and to care for our parents. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Very good to interface with you.
Wonderful.